My name is Carter Sterling, and yes, that's Sterling as in Sterling Development, the company that used to have its logo plastered on half the construction sites in this city. For 30 years, that name meant something. It was supposed to mean quality, integrity, a promise cast in concrete and steel. My grandfather built it on that promise. My father, Alistair, and my older brother, Julian, they inherited the name, but they treated the promise like a cheap rental. They saw it as a shield to hide behind, a brand to be leveraged until every last drop of goodwill was wrung out of it. I'm an engineer, a structural engineer to be precise. In my line of work, you don't deal in brand leverage or profit margins. You deal in physics. You deal in tensile strength, load-bearing calculations, and the unforgiving reality of gravity. Gravity doesn't care about our family name. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't accept bribes. It simply is. And for my entire career, I was the one person in my family's company who remembered that. I was the guy who made sure our buildings didn't fall down. The beginning of the end came on a Tuesday morning. It was one of those crisp autumn days where the sky is a painful, beautiful blue, the kind of day that makes you feel like anything is possible. I was in my office, a glass-walled box on the 30th floor of our last big project, a building I had practically willed into existence through sheer stubbornness, triple-checking every weld, every bolt, every pore. I was reviewing the preliminary schematics for our next venture, the Apex Tower. It was meant to be our masterpiece, a 50-story luxury condo that would scrape the clouds and redefine the city skyline. It was also the project that my father and brother were counting on to rocket the company into a new stratosphere of wealth. I was looking at the steel specifications, and a familiar cold knot was forming in the pit of my stomach. The numbers weren't just lean, they were anorexic. The specified grade of structural steel was a Chinese import I'd never heard of, with certifications that looked creative. It was cheaper, of course. Significantly cheaper. It would pad their profit margin by a cool 8 figures. It would also have the structural integrity of a wet cardboard box in a hurricane. My door slid open without a knock. It was Julian, my older brother. He has our father's smile, which is to say it's wide, white, and completely devoid of warmth. It's a predator's smile. He was dressed in a suit so sharp it could cut glass, holding 2 coffees. He placed one on my desk. I didn't touch it. He said, "Carter, good, you're looking at the Apex plans. Dad and I wanted to walk you through the final numbers before we push them to the city for approval." He gestured to the conference room. I already knew what this was. This wasn't a review. It was an ambush. I followed him into the big conference room, the one with the $100,000 mahogany table and the panoramic view of the city we were supposedly building. My father, Alistair, was already there, standing by the window, looking out like a king surveying his domain. He turned, and his face was set in that expression of grim paternal authority he perfected. It was the face he used when he was about to talk about duty and legacy, which was always code for "do something I know is wrong." He started in his low, rumbling voice. "Carter, your brother and I have been working tirelessly to ensure the future of this company. The Apex Tower is the key. It's not just a building, it's a statement. It's our legacy." He walked over to the table and laid a thick, rolled-up set of blueprints next to the file I was carrying. "These are the final plans. We need your signature, your stamp. Today." I unrolled them slowly. It was all there. The substandard steel, the dangerously long spans between support columns, the foundation spec that relied more on prayer than on concrete. It was a work of fiction, a beautifully rendered, professionally formatted, catastrophically dangerous lie. I looked up from the page, first at Julian, who was fidgeting with his cufflinks, avoiding my gaze, and then at my father, who met my eyes with a look of cold steel. "I know what you're thinking," Alistair said, his voice dropping. "You're thinking about the codes. You're thinking about the margins of error. Carter, you have to understand. The world has changed. Building codes are guidelines. They're written by bureaucrats for ideal scenarios. We're in the real world. We're dealing with real-world costs. This is how the game is played." Julian chimed in, his voice slick with practiced condescension. "Look, little brother, every other major developer in this city is doing the same thing. It's about being competitive. We've already spoken to the right people at the city. The inspection process will be a formality, a rubber stamp. All it needs is another rubber stamp." He tapped the empty signature box on the blueprints. "Yours." My hand felt cold. I could feel the weight of my engineering license, a piece of paper I had worked a decade to earn and 2 decades to keep spotless. It was more than a license to me. It was a covenant, a promise I made to every single person who would ever walk into a building I signed off on, a promise that they would be safe, that my math was right, that the foundation was true. I said, "This isn't just bending the rules. This is building a 50-story house of cards. This steel won't hold, not with the wind shears at that altitude, not in a seismic event. This is criminally negligent." Alistair slammed his palm down on the table. The sound cracked through the quiet room. "Don't you use that word in this office. Don't you dare. This is about family. This is about the Sterling name. Everything I have built, everything your grandfather built, is on the line. Are you a part of this family, or are you not? It's your duty, Carter, your duty to us, to secure our future." He was breathing heavily, his face flushed. Julian stepped in, playing the good cop. He put a hand on my shoulder. "Carter, Dad's right. Think about it. This one project secures everything. For us, for our kids. It's just one signature. You've been worrying about things falling down for 20 years, and have they ever? No, because you're the best. You make it work. Just make this one work." That was it. That was the line they always used. "You're the best, Carter, so you can make our shoddy plans safe. You're the genius, Carter, so you can find a way to make our cheap materials defy physics." For years I had done it. I'd over-engineered the parts I could control to compensate for the corners they cut. I'd demanded extra bracing here, a better grade of concrete there, fighting them for every scrap of integrity. I had held the line, but this was different. There was no compensating for a rotten skeleton. You can't over-engineer away structural steel that will snap under pressure. I looked at the blueprints. I looked at their expectant, greedy faces, and I felt something inside me break. Or maybe it was something finally setting into place. A piece of my own internal architecture that had been under stress for far too long, finally shearing off and settling into a new, unshakable position. I picked up the pen, a heavy, expensive fountain pen that my father had given me when I graduated. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I uncapped it, the click echoing in the tense silence. Their shoulders relaxed. Julian shot a triumphant smirk at my father. They thought they'd won. They always thought they'd won. I leaned over the plans, the smell of the ink and paper filling my senses. I signed my name in the box, Carter Sterling, P.E. The letters were clear and steady. Then I took my professional engineer's stamp from my briefcase, pressed it onto the ink pad, and brought it down with a firm final thud. The seal of my integrity, the symbol of my professional oath, stamped right onto their lie. I stood up straight. "All right, it's done." Alistair's face broke into that wide, false smile. He clapped me on the back. "Attaboy, Carter. I knew you'd see reason. I knew you were a Sterling at heart." I carefully, methodically, rolled up the blueprints. I secured them with a rubber band. I slid them into my own briefcase. Not theirs. Julian frowned. "What are you doing?" "Leave those here. We're sending them over to the city courier this afternoon." I looked at him, then at my father. "I'm saving you the courier fee. I'll walk them over myself." And with that I turned around. I walked out of the conference room, past my own office without a backward glance. I walked to the elevator, the signed, sealed lie in my briefcase, feeling as heavy as a tombstone. I wrote it down 30 floors in silence. I walked out of the front door of the building, into that beautiful, crisp autumn air, and then I turned left, and began the 10-block walk to the city inspector's office. I was going to hand deliver the plans, all right, and with them I was going to hand over my formal written resignation and a whistleblower complaint that would burn their empire to the ground. Let's see how the family name holds up under a federal investigation. The walk from the Sterling building to the municipal offices was exactly 1.2 miles. I know because I'd walked it before, years ago, when I was younger, and still naive enough to believe that a face-to-face meeting with a city planner could solve a problem my father had created. The city is a living thing, a network of arteries and veins, and as I walked, I could feel its pulse, the rumble of the subway beneath the pavement, the cacophony of car horns and sirens, the murmur of 1,000 conversations. It was the city I had helped build. I could look up and see the glint of the sun off the curtain wall of the Meridian Tower, a project from 15 years ago. I remember fighting my father for 6 weeks over the window glazing specifications. He wanted a cheaper supplier. I threatened to walk, and he finally relented. The people working in that building today had no idea that their view of the skyline was clear and undistorted because of a battle I'd won in a stuffy trailer on a muddy construction site. Every block held a memory, a silent testament to the war I had been fighting for 2 decades, a war against my own family, a war for the soul of the company my grandfather had founded. My briefcase felt impossibly heavy, a dead weight in my hand. Inside, nestled next to the fraudulent Apex Tower blueprints, was a thick manila envelope. It contained my letter of resignation and a 12-page summary document. For the past 18 months, ever since Julian was promoted to Chief Operating Officer and the cost-cutting turned from aggressive to outright reckless, I had been preparing for this day. I hadn't wanted it to come, but I'm an engineer. We plan for contingencies. We calculate for worst-case scenarios. My own family had become my worst-case scenario. My mind drifted back. I remembered my mother, Eleanor. She wasn't a builder, but she understood foundations. She was the moral bedrock of our family. She died 10 years ago, but her voice was still a constant echo in my head. "Your name is all you truly own, Carter," she'd told me once, long ago when I'd caught Julian cheating on a high school exam. "Don't ever let anyone tarnish it, not even family." For a decade I thought I was honoring her by staying, by being the backstop, the quality control, the one Sterling who still cared about the name. I was propping up the facade, hoping that somehow I could keep the rot from spreading. I see now that I wasn't honoring her. I was enabling them. I was the good son who made their bad deeds possible. Competence isn't a virtue when it's used to polish a lie. I remembered the Harrison Point project, a 20-story residential building we completed 5 years ago. Julian had been the project manager. It was his first big command. He'd come to me, panicked, 2 weeks before the final inspection. The budget was blown, and he'd tried to make it up by sourcing substandard electrical wiring. Not just a little substandard. We're talking stuff that was barely rated for a table lamp, let alone the electrical load of 200 apartments. He begged me to fix it. "Dad will kill me," he'd pleaded. "It'll ruin me." So I did. I pulled my team off another job, worked them around the clock for 10 straight days, pulling out the cheap wire and running new, compliant conduit. We falsified the daily work logs to hide the expense, burying it in the budget of another, larger project. I told myself I was doing it to protect the people who would live there, and I was, but I was also protecting him. I was protecting my father's precious heir from the consequences of his own greed and incompetence. That was my original sin. That was the moment I chose being a Sterling over being an engineer. I never made that mistake again. After Harrison Point, I started documenting everything. Every shortcut they proposed, every cheap material they sourced, every conversation where I had to explain, in painstaking detail, why their desire for a few extra percentage points of profit would put lives at risk. I kept it all in a password-protected file on a private server, a digital dam holding back a flood of their corruption. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my wife, Sarah. "Are you okay?" You left the office. I'd texted her a simple "it's happening" before I walked into that conference room. She was the only person on earth who knew the full weight of what I carried. She had watched me come home, night after night, the tension in my shoulders like coiled steel cables. She'd been the one who found me at 2 a.m. in my home office, surrounded by blueprints, running my own stress calculations on their latest scheme. "You can't save them from themselves, Carter," she had told me 100 times. "But you can save yourself." For years I didn't listen. A misguided sense of duty, a fool's hope that they would change, kept me chained to my desk. I stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of a storefront. I looked tired, older than my 48 years. The fire that had once driven me to be the best, to build things that would last, had been reduced to a pilot light, flickering weakly in the constant soul-killing storm of their avarice. What was I even fighting for anymore? The Sterling name? They had already destroyed it. They just hadn't told the public yet. The walk sign lit up. I crossed the street. My resolve hardened, turning from a liquid doubt into something solid, crystalline. I thought about the families who would have saved for a decade to afford a down payment on a condo in the Apex Tower. I thought about their children, sleeping in bedrooms 50 stories in the air, trusting that the structure around them was sound, trusting in my signature, in my stamp. My father was right about one thing. It was about duty. He was just wrong about to whom I owed it. My duty was not to his profit margin. It was to them, the anonymous trusting faces who would call that building home. As I neared the municipal building, my phone buzzed again. It was Sarah. I answered. "Hey." My voice was hoarse. "I'm almost there," I said. She didn't ask what I had decided. She didn't need to. She could hear it in my voice. "I just wanted to say one thing," she said, her voice clear and steady, a lifeline in the chaos of my thoughts. "Whatever happens next, I am so proud of you. Come home when you're done." She hung up. That was it. The final piece of rebar snapping into place. The last load-bearing column locking in. The structure of my new life was sound. I could feel it. I walked up the wide granite steps of the city building. It was an old structure built in the 30s, with a foundation of solid rock and integrity. A building from a time when people built things to last. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old paper and floor wax. I bypassed the main information desk. I had an appointment. I took the elevator to the 4th floor to the Department of Building and Safety. The receptionist looked up as I approached. "Carter Sterling, to see Chief Inspector Henderson." She nodded and picked up her phone. A moment later, a man in a rumpled suit with a kind, tired face emerged from a back office. This was Frank Henderson. He was a dying breed, a city inspector who had actually been a builder. He knew the job, he knew the codes, and he couldn't be bought. We'd known each other for 15 years. We'd argued, we'd yelled, but we respected each other. He saw me and his eyebrows raised in surprise. "Carter, didn't expect to see you here. I thought your runners usually handled the plan submissions." I shook his hand. His grip was firm. "Something I had to deliver myself, Frank." I paused, "And there's someone else here to meet us." As if on cue, another door opened, and a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 60s walked out. Mr. Davies, my lawyer. He'd been my father's lawyer once. He'd resigned from that position 5 years ago, telling me privately that he could no longer in good conscience represent the direction the company was taking. He was the first person I called after Harrison Point. He'd been advising me, pro bono, ever since. Frank Henderson's eyes darted from me to Davies and back again. The professional curiosity on his face shifted to serious concern. "Okay," he said slowly. "I think we should use my office." We followed him into a room cluttered with rolled-up blueprints and stacks of files. It was the office of a man who did the work. He closed the door behind us. "What's going on, Carter?" I opened my briefcase. I took out the rolled-up plans for the Apex Tower. I laid them on his desk. These are the final plans for the apex tower, signed and sealed by me this morning." Frank unrolled them. He's a fast study. It took him less than a minute. His eyes scanned the structural specs, his finger tracing the lines. I saw his jaw tighten. I saw a flash of anger, then profound disappointment in his eyes. He looked up at me, and his face was a mask of confusion. "Carter, you signed this? You stamped this piece of garbage?" "Yes, I did," I said, my voice even. "I signed it under duress, after being told my position and my duty to my family required it." Davies stepped forward, placing the thick manila envelope on the desk next to the blueprints. "Frank," he said, in his calm, authoritative voice, "Mr. Sterling is here today, not just as the chief engineer of Sterling Development, but as a whistleblower. The document in that envelope is his formal resignation, effective immediately. It also contains a signed, notarized affidavit detailing the circumstances of his signature on these plans. Furthermore, it includes a summary of documented evidence, compiled by Mr. Sterling over the last 18 months, pertaining to a pattern of fraudulent practices, material misrepresentation, and willful disregard for building and safety codes by the executive leadership of Sterling Development, namely Alistair and Julian Sterling." Frank stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He looked at me, and the confusion in his eyes was replaced by a slow, dawning understanding. He wasn't looking at a collaborator, he was looking at the star witness for the prosecution. "The evidence Carter has compiled," Davies continued, "includes original internal memos, supplier invoices for substandard materials that were later billed as premium grade, and sworn statements from 2 former site supervisors who were fired for refusing to sign off on unsafe work. It covers not just the Apex Tower, but also the Harrison Point residential complex and the downtown commercial tower at 4th and Main." I finally spoke. "I'm doing this, Frank, because they were going to build a 50-story coffin and put my name on it. I couldn't stop them from the inside anymore, so I'm stopping them from the outside. I'm giving you everything, the plans they want to build and the proof of what they've already built." Frank Henderson sat down heavily in his chair. He stared at the blueprints, then at the envelope. He ran a hand over his tired face. "Jesus, Carter," he breathed. "I always knew Alistair was a shark, but this is a whole other level." He looked at me, a new respect in his eyes. "This is going to be a firestorm. You know that, right? The DA is going to get involved. The feds probably, given the financial implications." "I know," I said. "That's the point. A building's foundation is only as strong as the ethics of the men who build it. My family's company had no ethics. It had no foundation. It was time for it to collapse under the weight of its own corruption." Davies added, "We are of course prepared to cooperate fully with any and all investigations. Carter's only concern is ensuring that the public is protected and that the structures in question are thoroughly and independently re-inspected." Frank nodded slowly, his mind clearly racing, processing the sheer scale of the fallout. He tapped the thick envelope. "This is the key, then?" "That's the key," I confirmed. But it wasn't my only key. As I stood there watching the first domino begin to topple, my thoughts were already on the next phase. This wasn't just about tearing something down. It had to be about building something new. In my pocket, my other phone, a clean phone with a new number, was silent. On it was a single contact, a project manager named Maria Flores. She was the best PM in the company. I had hired her myself, straight out of engineering school 10 years ago. She was sharp, honest, and she saw the rot in the company as clearly as I did. I had spoken to her last week in a quiet coffee shop far from the office. I had told her a storm was coming. I told her to get her resume ready and to quietly identify the handful of other people in the company, the site supervisors, the draftsmen, the estimators, who still believed in building things the right way. The people who, like her, were loyal to the work, not to the name on the door. My secret plan wasn't just about exposing the rot, it was about salvaging the healthy parts of the tree before the whole thing fell. Sterling Development was about to die, but from its ashes I was going to build something better. I had already filed the incorporation papers, Bedrock Engineering and Construction. A new name, a new promise, my promise, and I had a feeling that very soon I'd have a team of the best, most ethical builders in the city ready to join me. The talent exodus was about to begin. My father and brother thought they were just losing their engineer. They were about to find out they were losing their entire foundation. Leaving the municipal building felt like stepping out of a pressure chamber. The air itself seemed lighter. Mr. Davies and I walked in silence for a block before he finally spoke, his tone measured and professional, but with an undercurrent of grim satisfaction. They will receive a stop work order on every active site by noon, he stated, not as a prediction but as a fact. The city will freeze all pending permits for Sterling Development. Frank Henderson will personally walk this upstairs to the district attorney's office. Given the potential for interstate wire fraud with the material suppliers, the feds will likely be notified by the end of the day. Your father and brother are about to have a very, very bad afternoon. Good, was all I could manage to say. The single word felt inadequate, but it was the truest thing I could summon. Davies put a comforting hand on my shoulder for a moment. Go home, Carter. Be with your wife. Disconnect the old phone. Don't speak to them. Don't respond to emails. From this moment on, I am your only point of contact with them. Let the storm break, but you don't have to stand in the rain. I followed his advice. I took a cab home, the city flashing by in a blur through the window. For the first time in years, I wasn't scrutinizing every building, looking for flaws. I was just watching. When I got home, Sarah was waiting at the door. She didn't say a word, just wrapped her arms around me. I buried my face in her shoulder and stood there for a long time, the tension of 2 decades finally beginning to seep out of my bones. It felt like the slow, groaning release of a massively over-torqued bolt. Inside, I took my old company phone, the one that had been a leash for 20 years, and I powered it down. I put it in a drawer in my study. Then I took out my new phone, the clean phone. I sent a single pre-written text to Maria Flores. Phase 2. Her reply came back less than a minute later, acknowledged. Standing by. My study is my sanctuary. It's lined with bookshelves, but not just with books on engineering and architecture. The shelves are also filled with meticulously constructed scale models, a perfect replica of the Brooklyn Bridge, its delicate-looking suspension cables all bearing a precisely calculated load, a model of the Pantheon in Rome, a testament to the genius of ancient engineering. For me, building these models was a form of therapy. It was a way to reconnect with the purity of design, the honesty of physics, a world away from my family's compromised reality. While they were busy figuring out how to cheapen things, I was in here studying perfection. It was a quiet rebellion. I sat at my desk, the silence of the house a stark contrast to the storm I had just unleashed. Out of a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress, I powered my old laptop on and logged into the voicemail portal for my old desk line. The system was already blinking with a frantic digital pulse. The first message was from Julian, timed at 12:15 p.m. His voice was tight, annoyed. Carter, where the hell are you? I just got a call from the foreman at the Apex site. A city inspector just slapped a stop work order on the gate, said our permits are suspended. This is your fault. You were supposed to smooth things over with them. Call me, now. The second message was 20 minutes later. The annoyance in Julian's voice had been replaced by a rising tide of panic. Carter, call me back. I'm not kidding. Alistair is on the phone with the deputy mayor, and he's getting stonewalled. They're telling him all Sterling projects are under review. What did you say to them? What the hell did you do? The third message, less than an hour after that, was from my father. Alistair's voice was a low, dangerous growl, a controlled rage that was far more terrifying than any shouting. Carter, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you have made a grave miscalculation. You have betrayed this family. You are going to call me, and you are going to explain yourself, and then you are going to fix what you have broken. Do you understand me? You will fix this. Fix this. That was always their mantra. Break it, then make Carter fix it. I closed the laptop. They still didn't get it. They thought this was a negotiation. They thought this was a problem that could be fixed with threats or money or backroom deals. They didn't understand that they weren't dealing with a disgruntled employee. They were dealing with a law of physics. A system under a critical load had finally failed. The next morning, the first tremor hit the news. A small article on the website of the city's business journal, citing anonymous sources in the municipal building, Sterling Development Scion resigns, all city projects halted pending investigation. It was a carefully worded piece, but the implications were seismic. The phones at Sterling Development would be ringing off the hook. Bankers, investors, subcontractors, all asking the same question, what's going on? The Sterling name, the brand my father and brother had mortgaged their integrity to protect, had its first visible crack. That afternoon, I met with Maria at the small leased office space I had secured for Bedrock Engineering. It was just 2 rooms, bare walls and a couple of folding tables, but it felt more real and solid than the entire 30th floor of the Sterling building. Maria walked in, carrying a laptop and a hard drive. She was a woman in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She was the best operational mind I had ever worked with. It's chaos over there, she said, forgoing any pleasantries. Your father is in lockdown with his lawyers. Julian is trying to run the company, which is like watching a toddler try to fly a 747. He's yelling at everyone, accusing people of being disloyal. He doesn't know what to do. And the team, I asked. The good ones are scared, she said. Not of Julian, but of the ship going down. They know the company's reputation is about to be radioactive. They know that having Sterling on their resume might soon be a liability. She slid the hard drive across the table to me. This is everything. Clean copies of the project files for every job we've worked on for the past 5 years. Not the doctored versions in the main server. These are the real daily reports, the real material logs, the ones the site supervisors and I kept on the side because we knew this day might come. This was the core of my plan. It wasn't just about whistleblowing, it was about continuity. It was about proving that good work had been done, in spite of, not because of the leadership. It was about protecting the reputations of the handful of people who deserved it. Okay, I said. It's time. Make the calls. Maria nodded, a grim smile on her face. They're already expecting them. This was the silent takeover, not of a company, but of its talent, its soul. While Alistair and Julian were huddled with lawyers, trying to spin a story of a disgruntled employee, their actual operational capacity was about to walk out the door. Maria wasn't just my ally, she was my co-conspirator in competency. We had identified the 4 key people whose departure would cripple the company's ability to function. Kenji Tanaka, the lead site supervisor, a man who could orchestrate the complex ballet of a 100-person construction crew in his sleep. David Chen, our best structural draftsman, who could turn my calculations into flawless workable drawings. And the 2 senior estimators, who knew the real costs of materials and labor down to the penny, and whose knowledge was the only thing preventing Julian's idiotic cost-cutting from bankrupting the company years ago. Over the next 24 hours, they all resigned, one by one. They didn't make a scene. They sent polite, professional emails to HR citing new opportunities. The HR department, already in a state of panic, just processed the paperwork. Julian and Alistair were so focused on the external legal threat that they didn't even notice the internal collapse until it was too late. They didn't realize that a company isn't a logo or a bank account, it's people, and they had treated their best people like disposable assets. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it all at once. The public reveal came 3 days after I walked out of their office. It wasn't a press release from me. It was an announcement from the city's largest and most prestigious real estate investment trust, a company called Northlight Properties. They were our biggest client, or rather, they were my biggest client. The CEO, a man named Robert McLaren, was a tough, old-school developer who valued results above all else. His loyalty was never to Sterling Development. It was to the fact that I always delivered his projects on time, on budget, and without a single safety incident. The press release announced that Northlight Properties was terminating all its existing contracts with Sterling Development, citing a crisis of confidence in the firm's executive leadership and ethical standing. And in the final, killer paragraph, it announced that they had retained a new firm, Bedrock Engineering, led by its founder Carter Sterling, to oversee the safety and structural assessment of all their current and future projects, including taking over the management of 2 sites previously run by Sterling. That was checkmate. My phone, the old one, which I had foolishly decided to power on for a moment, exploded with a rage that was almost palpable. It was a voicemail from Julian. There was no pleading this time. It was the raw, incoherent scream of a man watching his world burn down around him. You did this. You stole our biggest client. You backstabbing, treacherous. We'll sue you. We'll sue you into the Stone Age. You can't do this. It's illegal. He devolved into pure sputtering fury. I listened to the message and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, just a profound, empty quiet. It was the quiet of a structural engineer who has just watched a condemned building, cleared of all life, finally collapse into a pile of dust, exactly as he calculated it would. The silent takeover was complete. The foundation was gone. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Sterling Development. The Northlight Properties announcement was like a flare in the night, signaling to the rest of the market that the ship was not only taking on water but was actively being scuttled. The next 48 hours saw an exodus, not just the key people Maria and I had targeted, but a dozen others. Project coordinators, accountants, junior engineers. They saw the writing on the wall. They knew that a company without its lead engineer and its biggest client was a zombie, a walking corpse with no future. They flooded the job market, and many of them sent their resumes to the one place that represented stability and integrity, Bedrock Engineering. My 2-room office was suddenly the most sought-after destination for the city's top construction talent. Julian's threats of a lawsuit were just noise. Mr. Davies had anticipated it, of course. We had been meticulous. I hadn't actively solicited a single employee while I was still with Sterling. I hadn't taken any proprietary data, only my own work product and the copies of records Maria had provided to substantiate the whistleblower complaint. As for the Northlight contract, Robert McLaren was more than happy to provide a sworn affidavit stating that he had terminated his relationship with Sterling before engaging with my new firm, a decision made solely on the public news of the investigation and his complete loss of faith in Alistair and Julian's leadership. There was no case. It was the desperate thrashing of a drowning man. The true power shift became apparent a week later. It came in the form of a visitor to my home. I was in the kitchen with Sarah, making dinner, something I hadn't had the mental energy to do in years. The doorbell rang. Sarah looked at me, a question in her eyes. I shook my head. I wasn't expecting anyone. She went to the door, and I heard a familiar voice, Julian's. But it wasn't the voice from the enraged voicemail. This was a different voice, a broken one. Sarah came back into the kitchen, her expression tight. "It's Julian. He wants to talk to you. He looks awful. Tell him to make an appointment with Mr. Davies," I said, not looking up from the vegetables I was chopping. "I did," she said softly. "He's refusing to leave. He's crying, Carter." I put the knife down and wiped my hands on a towel. I walked to the front door. Julian was standing on the porch, his impossibly expensive suit looking rumpled and slept in. His face was pale and puffy, his eyes red-rimmed. The predator's smile was gone, replaced by the desperate grimace of the cornered. "Carter," he began, his voice cracking, "you have to stop this, please. You're destroying Dad. He hasn't left his study in 3 days. The banks are calling in our loans. We're finished. You've ruined us. I stood there, in the doorway of my home, a place he hadn't visited in over a decade, and I felt a flicker of something. It wasn't pity. It was a kind of detached, clinical curiosity. This was the final stage of their cycle of behavior. When arrogance failed, and rage failed, they always fell back on emotional manipulation. The appeal to a family bond they themselves had spent a lifetime desecrating. "I didn't do this, Julian," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a concrete pillar. "You did, you and Dad. You did this when you decided that profit was more important than integrity. You did this every time you cut a corner, every time you lied to a client, every time you put a price tag on public safety." I just held up a mirror. "But it's family," he pleaded, tears now openly streaming down his face. It was a pathetic, unconvincing performance. "We're brothers. You owe us your loyalty. You can't just burn everything to the ground." "My loyalty is to the truth," I said, "and my duty is to the people who trust my name on a set of plans. A duty you and Dad tried to force me to betray. You didn't want a brother, Julian. You wanted an accomplice. You wanted a scapegoat with an engineering license. The answer is no." I started to close the door. He put his hand out to stop it, his desperation turning back to a familiar, ugly sneer. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? You think you've won. We'll see. We'll tell them you were in on it from the start, that you were the mastermind. We'll drag your name through the mud with ours." And that was the moment any last lingering ember of familial connection I might have felt turned to cold, hard ash. He wasn't just corrupt. He was soulless. I looked him dead in the eye. "Go ahead, Julian. Try it. Tell the district attorney that the man who voluntarily handed over 12 pages of meticulously documented evidence against you, along with his own resignation, was secretly the mastermind. Tell them that the man who brought his lawyer with him to the city inspector's office was your co-conspirator. See how that works out for you. Now get off my property. If you need to communicate with me further, you can do so through my lawyer." I closed the door firmly in his face. I heard him shout my name once, a choked, desperate sound, and then the crunch of his shoes on the gravel as he retreated. Sarah was standing right behind me. She put her hand on my arm. "Are you all right?" "I am," I said, and for the first time I knew it was absolutely true. The power had shifted. They had nothing left. No leverage, no authority, no moral high ground. They were just two empty men in a collapsing building, and I was finally, blessedly, outside. The final confrontation, when it came, was not at all what I expected. It wasn't a shouting match in a boardroom or a tense meeting in a lawyer's office. It was a phone call, 3 weeks after Julian's pathetic performance on my doorstep. I was at the Bedrock engineering office. We had taken over the adjacent suite, and the sound of hammering and sawing was a constant welcome noise. We were building. The team was gelling, a palpable sense of relief and shared purpose in the air. Maria was running point on the North Light transition. Kenji was out in the field assessing the 2 sites we'd taken over, and I was at my desk, sketching out a proposal for a new community health clinic. My new phone rang. The display showed a blocked number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" There was a pause, and then a voice I hadn't heard in weeks. My father's, but it was stripped of all its bluster and authority. It was thin, reedy, the voice of an old man. "Carter." I didn't say anything. I just waited. "I need to see you," he said. "Just us. No lawyers. Please." I thought about it for a long moment. Davies would have advised against it, but this wasn't about legal strategy anymore. This was about closing a chapter. "The bar at the old Grand Heritage Hotel," I said. I hung up before he could reply. The Grand Heritage was neutral ground, a quiet, dark wood-paneled place where old money and old secrets went to die. I got there first and took a small booth in the back. I ordered a club soda. I watched him walk in. He looked like a ghost. His shoulders were stooped, the expensive suit hanging off his frame. He had aged 10 years in a month. He slid into the booth opposite me, avoiding my eyes. He stared into his empty glass for a full minute before he spoke. They're indicting Julian next week. Wire fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. The DA is offering him a plea deal if he testifies against me. I just nodded. This was the inevitable outcome, the physics of justice. Everything's gone, he whispered, his voice raspy. The company is in receivership. The banks have seized our assets. The house, they're taking the house. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were hollow. Why, Carter, after all I gave you? After everything I built for you and your brother, why would you do this to your own family? I took a sip of my drink, the cold fizz a sharp sensation. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head 1,000 times with 1,000 different angry, righteous speeches. But looking at the broken man in front of me, the anger was gone. All that was left was a sad, clear-eyed certainty. You didn't build it for me, Dad, I said, my voice low and even. You built it for yourself. You built it on a foundation of lies and shortcuts, and you were angry at me because I was the only one who kept pointing out the cracks. I was a businessman, he hissed, a flash of the old fire returning. I did what I had to do to survive, to thrive. No, I countered, shaking my head slowly. You did what was easy. You did what was greedy. My grandfather built a company. You and Julian turned it into a racket. You were going to build a 100-story tomb and put my name on the cornerstone. You asked me why I did it. I did it because you forgot the most important rule of our business, a rule our grandfather lived by. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. What rule? The foundation has to be sound, I said, and not just the one made of concrete and steel, the ethical one. Yours was rotten to the core. It was bound to collapse. All I did was get out of the building before it came down on top of me. He slumped back in his seat, the fight draining out of him completely. He looked defeated, utterly and completely. Then I delivered the final, quiet blow, the vindication. The city's investigation has, as you know, red-flagged every major project Sterling has completed in the last 10 years. They have to be assessed for structural integrity. It's a massive undertaking. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. The receiver, working with the city, put out a request for proposal for an engineering firm to lead that assessment. My firm won the contract this morning. The color drained from his face. He understood the implications immediately. I wasn't just free of them. I was now being paid, handsomely, to professionally document and supervise the dismantling of his entire legacy. I was the one who would sign off on the reports, detailing every lie, every shortcut, every single dollar they had saved at the expense of safety. I was the one who would fix it, but this time I would do it my way, on my terms, for everyone to see. I stood up and put a $20 bill on the table to cover our drinks. Goodbye, Dad. I walked away without looking back. I didn't need to. I knew what was behind me. The rubble of the past, and ahead of me, through the doors of that dark bar and out into the bright afternoon sun, was the future I was building. It's been a year since that day. The office of Bedrock Engineering is no longer 2 small rooms. We take up an entire floor of a downtown building, one I didn't build, but one whose blueprints I reviewed as part of our contract with the city, just to be sure. It's solid. The walls are covered in plans for new projects. A library, a pediatric care wing for the city hospital, a low-income housing development, meaningful work. Maria is my partner now, the COO. Kenji and David are our lead supervisors. Our team is a collection of the best and brightest, the people who fled the toxic wasteland of Sterling development and found a place where doing the right thing is the only way we do things. My father, Alistair, accepted a plea bargain. He avoided prison time due to his age and health, but he was financially and professionally ruined, forced into a quiet, ignominious retirement. Julian wasn't so lucky. He's currently serving a 5-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. The Sterling name, once a mark of prestige in this city, is now a whispered cautionary tale, a synonym for corruption and collapse. But my name, Carter Sterling, the one on my license, the one on the door of my firm. It means something different now. It means integrity. It means trust. It means that when you see it on a set of plans, you know the foundation is sound. I still build models in my study, but now, when I look at them, I don't feel a sense of escape. I feel a sense of continuity. The same principles of honesty, precision, and strength that apply to a perfect scale model are the ones we apply to every real-world project we undertake. I've learned a lot this past year. I learned that loyalty to a corrupt institution isn't a virtue, it's a form of self-betrayal. I learned that you can't fix a rotten structure from the inside, because the rot is in the foundation itself. Sometimes, the only responsible thing to do is to walk away, let it fall, and build something better in its place. You have to be willing to tear it all down to the bedrock and start again. And that's the real moral of this story. So many of us feel trapped in situations where we are the lone voice of reason, the only ones holding back the tide of incompetence or greed. We're told to be team players, to not rock the boat, to be loyal to a name or a brand that has long since abandoned any loyalty to us. But your integrity, your professional oath, your good name, that's the only asset you truly own. It's not for sale, it's not negotiable, and protecting it is the most important job you will ever have. Because in the end, competence isn't cheap, but it's a hell of a lot less expensive than losing it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the last sane person in the room, let me know in the comments below. I read every one, and please, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you're subscribed for more stories about getting what you deserve. Until next time.